Hi, welcome back to the shed for episode 8 of the Jurgs cut build, where we're going to continue working on that fretboard. Last time we got this fretboard all marked out and the beginnings of the fret slots cut in. That was a major piece of work. Obviously I had to measure that from a rule and it took an absolute age, but we got there and I'm happy with the results. I've double checked all the measurements and they all work out and all the fret slots look nice and parallel, which is always great. This time I want to get the radius put onto the board. I want to get the markers marked out and installed. And I also want to try and get this cut, if not to shape, roughly to shape, so that we can at least get it temporarily mounted on the neck and start to have a better idea of where we're going with things. Now I understand that at least some of the base sixes, if not all of them, had a 7¼ inch fretboard radius. Now I actually prefer a much flatter radius than that, and seeing as this guitar is for me, I'm going to do it at 12, which is what I normally work at. And to make this as quick and easy as possible, I'm hoping that I'll be able to get the vast majority of the work done with a plane, and that I'm not going to have to stand here sanding for hours and hours on end, because I hate that job. I'm hoping that this is going to plane nicely. I did plane down one edge to get it nice and square and straight, and that worked a treat. I'm looking at the figure on this and I think we should be planing in this direction. Okay, so that's the bulk of the radius put in. Done it mainly with the plane, but I've also had a little bit of a sand on it, and it's very close. It's just a little bit off in the middle. But what I'm thinking is, this is way too wide for what I need, and it's actually much wider than my radius block. So I'm not really going to be able to sand it in properly until it's more like the real width. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to break out the saw and set up the guide on it so I can recut these slots, because I'll bring you in closer. We've lost most of the slots off this side. So we'll recut the slots down to their actual final depth. We can then establish a proper center line on it, mark it up, drill it, install the dot markers. Then we can get it set up on the neck where we want it. And from there we can rough trim it almost to size. And then we can sand in the radius properly, because it'll be a more appropriate width. So I'll get this off the bench and we'll set it up again, stud up a little bit from the top of the bench so that we're not going to be cutting into it with the saw, and then we can get them slots put in properly again. Well, that's the fret slots re-established, and I've also put a centre line in with the marking gauge It's not that deep, and it will sand out once we do the final shaping on the board. But I want something that's both very fine, and the marking gauge does that, and isn't going to kind of rub off in a hurry, because we're going to need it quite a lot for the next couple of operations that we need to do. Now, first of those is to mark out and install the dot markers. And I've already been over this, and you might just be able to see on the back edge of here, I've marked where the markers need to go. I've double checked them. I'm going to check them again because, as anyone who's watched any of my videos will know, I'm absolutely super paranoid about putting dots in the wrong place. So I'll go over those once again, check them out, make sure they're in the right places, and then we can get them properly marked out and then get the dots installed. Okay, so we're all drilled out for the markers, and I was focusing that hard on not messing this up that I might have messed it up. I initially positioned the markers at the 12th fret way too far, and where I'd put them would have actually put them right on the edge of the fretboard, and they would look stupid. Unfortunately, I drilled one of the holes before I realised. I've brought them in a bit, I've re-drilled them. I'm going to put the dots in, and I'm hoping that when I properly profile this board, I'll sand past the hole that I put in, or sand most of it out to the point where we can repair it. Bit of a cock up, but I'm sure we can come back from it. So next up, we'll break out the super glue, we'll get these dots glued in, and then we can think about getting this board trimmed down to its proper shape and getting that radius properly sanded in. Okay, so that's the dots in, for the time being at least. Now I've gone back to the neck and I've marked up for the nut line and put all the centre lines on. And then I've married those up with the known nut line on the net blank. And I've marked out a rough outline for the neck itself. So I'm going to get that over to the bandsaw now, trim that off a little bit outside the white line, leave myself a little bit of spare material, and then we can look to get the rest of this radius sanded in once we've got the actual shape that we need. Now I've been having a little bit of a think about this inlay situation, and I'm thinking, is there a potential fix in here? And what I mean by that is, do I have the potential to actually remove some of this material? I'll probably have to remove the dots first, route that whole 12th fret position out of the fretboard, cut a very fine veneer which I can inlay into there, glue it into position, recut the fret slots, and then sand it flush with the rest of the fretboard, and then reinsert the 2 spare dot markers that I've got. And by doing so, the only witness mark that I would have is to have a mark on the top and bottom of the fretboard, which I think would be much less noticeable than any kind of repair that I can do to that. I'll bring you in a bit closer and you can see that it is actually quite bad and would be quite tricky to repair. I think that's doable. I'm pretty confident that I can actually achieve that. And worst case scenario, if it really wasn't looking good on the edges of the fretboard, I could actually put a bit of binding on, which is something that they did do on the base 6. It's a little bit more work, but I think it's worth the effort. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drill out these dot markers, get those out of the way because they won't cut particularly well. And then I'm going to take this little hand router and use that to remove the material. Okay, so that's glued in. It seems to have gone okay. And it looks like, I can get that in the camera, it looks like it's squeezed out nicely on the edges. So I'm quite hopeful that that will give me a nice tight glue joint and hopefully we won't be able to see it too much. So I'll leave that probably overnight to dry up and get back to it tomorrow and see how we've done. Okay, so it's the next evening. This has had about 22-ish hours to dry. So we'll just get the clamps off and see how this has gone down. And I think first impressions are it actually matches in quite well. The grain isn't a perfect match, but I think once the frets are in, it's going to break the look of it up anyway, so you won't really be able to tell. It looks as if it's gone down nicely on the sides. Won't really be able to tell until we've cleaned it up a little bit, so I'm going to just very quickly saw off these bits that are extra on the sides. We can give them as a quick plane, and then we can get this flushed down. It's not too bad on one side, but this side is a little bit higher, so we will have to do a little bit of work, probably with a block plane. And I don't know how well this is going to show up, but that is where it's joined. There's actually some darker lines that do run through this wood, so I think it's going to blend in very, very well. There's barely anything at all. So we'll get this back onto the bench and we'll just trim off the excess on the top. Okay, so that's pretty much flushed off now. There's just a little tiny bit proud. So I'll get this off the bench. I'll get it set up in my little sanding jig and we'll get the radiusing block on it. Hopefully this shouldn't take too much longer. Okay, so there's that repair finished off. I'm looking at that, you can hardly tell that it's been patched at all. Obviously the grain kind of doesn't match, but I think once you get the frets in there, you won't notice that. So I'm just going to kind of mark in for these position markers. We'll break out the dividers, pop a couple of marks in. Like that. Sand all that pencil off. We'll get that over to the drill press, get those two holes drilled, and then we can glue the dots back in. Okay, and there it is with the markers in. I forgot to turn the camera on when I made a start on cutting the fret slots back in. I did that with a Japanese pull saw because it's finer, and I managed to just get it into the joint between the new and the old wood, and I've just kind of started that fret slot. But all in all, I'm extremely happy with that. I was fairly confident I could get a bit of wood to go in there, but I didn't think I'd get it to match quite that well. And I didn't think I'd get these joins on the edge to blend in as well as they have, but they actually look really, really nice. So I'm very happy with that repair. You can see that the grain doesn't continue through there, but I'm pretty confident once you get a couple of frets in, that will kind of break the whole grain pattern up and it'll look absolutely fine. Next steps on this are to finish off with these markers, get the fret slots back in, get this positioned onto the neck and get it trimmed up and cleaned up properly. And from there, we can start working out neck positioning, where the bridge needs to go, and where the neck pocket needs to go on the body. But I'm going to leave all that for the next episode. I think we've covered quite a lot of ground in this one. So I'll be back in a couple of days' time with that. But until then, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already done so, and I'll look forward to seeing you then. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye bye.